I have told this story only once before to a Federation cultural record officer who came to the workshop with a clipboard and a patient expression, and stayed for 4 hours. I told her the short version. She said the long version was what she needed. I told her I only had the short version. That was not entirely true. The long version starts on a Tuesday, in the 43rd year of my posting at Kathos Amarin Way Station, which is a deep transit orbiting a chalk yellow gas moon called Velreith, at the outer edge of the Kathos system. If you have never been to Kathos Amarin, it looks exactly like what it is, a corridor. It exists to let ships pass through it. The people who live there, and there are perhaps 400 of us, are the people whose function is to keep the corridor running: fuel handlers, berthing coordinators, a medical station, a customs officer named Seth who has worked the same gate for 22 years and knows every loophole in the compact transit code by heart, and me. My name is Sale Dunmore. I am 49 years old. For 31 years I have operated a precision instrument repair workshop in Concourse Annex 7 of the Kathos Amarin commercial ring. The annex is a narrow rectangular space with a long skylight overhead, genuine glass, not panel, original to the station's construction 400 years ago, and when the orbital position is right, the chalk yellow light from Velreith comes through it at a low angle and turns everything in the workshop the color of old bone. I have worked in that light so long that I associate it with concentration. When the Velreith light comes in low, I do my best work. I fix things, that is all. I fix navigational astrolabes, medical scanner arrays, Velosar resonance calibration tools, Federation transit beacon housings, personal effects that have no replacement parts because the manufacturer stopped making them 40 years ago. I fix what people bring me. I charge a fair rate. I do not make conversation. The workshop is known among the station's long-stay population as the place you go when something is not fixable by any other means, and Saul Dunmore will look at it for 10 minutes and either tell you what is wrong in one sentence or hand it back in silence. Both outcomes are regarded as informative. I did not choose this work for love of it, not at first. I chose it because I had a facility for reading small mechanical things. The way a vibration moves through a structure, the way a material deforms under uneven stress, the tolerances that matter and the tolerances that do not. My father repaired agricultural measurement instruments on a frontier moon called Cathora. I spent 12 years of my childhood watching him work. He said once that the difference between a competent craftsperson and a good one is that the competent one understands how the thing was designed to work, and the good one understands how the thing actually works, which are sometimes different propositions. I have thought about that sentence for 37 years. I believe he was right. The child came to me on a morning in early 4th month, which is the month when Velreith's orbit brings it closest to the station, and the chalk yellow light through the skylight runs strongest. I had been in the workshop since before 5th hour, working on a Vel-Sauron biorhythm scanner that had developed an intermittent fault in its tertiary resonance array. The fault was intermittent because the tertiary array was temperature sensitive and only misbehaved when the scanner had been running for more than 2 hours at standard atmospheric conditions. I had spent 3 mornings building a temperature-controlled enclosure to replicate the fault on demand. That morning, I had finally replicated it. I was elbow-deep in the scanner housing, and I was in the state that I think of as the good silence, not the absence of thought, but the concentration of it, when I heard something in the doorway. I did not look up immediately. The workshop door stands open during operating hours. People come in, look around, leave. It is not unusual to hear a presence in the doorway without it immediately announcing itself. I kept my attention on the tertiary array for another 2 minutes, isolated the fault, and then I looked. The child was standing at the threshold. She was small, I would say waist-high, perhaps a little less, though I have never been good at estimating the size of children. She had pale, sandy gold skin, the warm-tone variety I associated with Vel-Kasari physiology, and silver hair worn loose around her pointed ears. Her eyes were amber honey, the deep, rich amber of old resin, with a faint interior quality to them, the way some gemstones seem to hold light from inside, rather than reflect it from outside. She was wearing a garment that had once been fine, and was now travel-worn. A layered pale cream fabric with copper thread trim along the hem and collar, both hem and collar frayed at the edges. The garment was too long for her, and had been folded up at the cuffs. She was holding something in both hands, pressed against her sternum. I could see it was small, pale bone, I thought. or carved composite, and that whatever it was, she was holding it with a particular tension of someone carrying something breakable that they do not trust themselves to carry safely. I said, "You can come in." She did not move for a moment. Then she came in, 3 careful steps, and stopped in front of the main work counter. She held out the object. I set down my calibration tool and took it from her. It was a small carved figure, 6-limbed, low-slung, crouching, perhaps 12 centimeters from snout to tail. The carving was old work, meticulous. Each of the 6 limbs was articulated, not separately moving, but carved in mid-stride, so the figure looked as though it had been caught in a moment between steps. The material was pale bone, velcast bone, I thought, which has a slightly waxy sheen that distinguishes it from standard composite, and the surface had been polished over years of handling to the deep, smooth warmth of something that has been held and held and held again. There were markings along the spine, a series of thin, incised lines in a pattern I did not recognize, but which had the quality of a naming mark, formal and deliberate. And inside, I could feel it without opening the figure. Just from the way the weight distributed when I tilted it, there was a resonance element, a small one. I tilted it again, more carefully, and heard the faintest ghost of a sound, not a full note, but the shadow of one, the memory of what the figure was meant to do when it was working correctly. "It doesn't sing anymore," the child said. Her voice was even and small, accented in the Velkasari manner, vowels slightly rounded, consonants precise. I held the figure up toward the skylight and turned it slowly. "How long has it been broken?" "Since we left," she said. I noted the phrasing. "Not since we arrived, since we left." "How long have you had it?" "Always." She said this without hesitation, the way children say things that are simply facts. I set the figure on the counter and reached for my examination lens, a Federation-issued 12-dax magnification loop with a light ring built into the frame. I clipped it to my eye and examined the joints. Velkasari Vathanar figures are name-day objects, given at first naming, meant to be carried. This one had been made by someone who knew what they were doing. The joints were proper tension fit, not adhesive, which meant they could be opened without damage. I found the release points, 4 of them, 1 on each of the primary limbs, and pressed them in sequence with a probe tool. The figure opened along a horizontal seam at the midpoint of the body. Inside was the resonance chamber. Velkasari resonance toys work on the same principle as any bone and membrane wind instrument. Air passes through the chamber and across a vibrating element, producing sound. In a Vathanar, that element is a crystalline membrane stretched across a bone frame. The membrane is made from a specific variety of Velka's mineral crystal that has both the flexibility and the acoustic properties needed to produce the Vathanar's characteristic sound. A 3-note chord, the 3 notes slightly staggered in time so they arrive as a ripple rather than a simultaneous burst. The sound carries at a distance. On a quiet day in a still room, a properly functioning Vathanar can be heard from 40 meters. The membrane in this one was cracked. A thin diagonal fracture ran from the upper left mount point to the lower right corner, approximately 2/3 of the membrane's width. It was a clean fracture, not a shatter. The crystal had failed along a stress line, probably from a sharp impact or a rapid pressure change, the kind of thing that happens when a transit vessel makes an unscheduled jump. The fracture was not recent. There was a faint discoloration at the crack edge that told me it had been sitting broken for some weeks. I closed the figure. "I can fix it," I said. The child looked at me with her amber honey eyes. She did not look relieved. She looked as though she had already decided I could fix it before she came in, and that this confirmation was simply the process running, as she had calculated it would. "How long?" she said. "The membrane needs to be replaced. I don't carry Velcast crystal stock, but I have a Federation mineral composite that has very similar acoustic properties. If you want the original tonal signature exactly, I'll need to tune it, which takes a day. If you'll accept within 3% of the original, I can do it in a morning." "The exact sound," she said. "It needs to be the exact sound." I noted this. Most people do not ask for the exact sound. Most people ask for working. "Then come back tomorrow before the Velreth morning light shifts. I'll have it." She nodded once, the same precise economy I had already noticed in her. She turned to go. "I'll need a payment deposit," I said, not because it was much. The membrane replacement was a minor job, but because I do not do work without deposit from people I don't know, and I did not know this child. She stopped, turned back, and set a small flat stone on the counter. It was pale gray, polished with a white diagonal mineral vein running through it. A Velos gift stone, unless I was mistaken, though I had never had a Velkasari use one before. That is a gift token, I said. I know, she said. It means I will come back. She left. I stood at the counter holding the broken Vathanar and thought for a moment about the stone. A Velkasari child traveling alone on a deep transit way station, carrying a name day toy with a fractured resonance membrane, who knew the gift token custom well enough to use it as a deposit. I thought about the phrase "since we left," and about the fact that she had come to my workshop specifically, not to the general supply vendors, not to the station's listed repair services, not to the customs office or the medical station. She had come to me. I had not advertised. I never advertised. The station's long-term residents know I am here. Transients ask around. I set the broken Vathanar on my precision stand and turned on the full-spectrum examination light. Then I went to the mineral composite cabinet and began going through my crystal stock. I found what I needed after 20 minutes of sorting. A panel of Federation-certified mineral composite Class 7 acoustic grade, used primarily in navigational beacon membrane sets. The acoustic properties were within 2% of natural Velkas crystal for the relevant frequency range, which put it comfortably within the tolerance I had quoted. I cut a replacement membrane to dimension, mounted it on the bone frame, and spent the rest of the morning tuning. Tuning a Vathanar is not quick work if you want precision. The 3-note chord is not produced by the membrane alone. It is produced by the interaction between the membrane and 3 resonance channels cut into the bone frame, each channel a slightly different length, which means each note has not only a fundamental pitch, but a specific decay rate, and the 3 decays have to be balanced against each other, or the chord sounds wrong. Not wrong in a way most people could name, but wrong in a way that feels unfinished, like a door not quite latched. I have a standard Federation pitch calibration tool, and I used it. But I also used my ear, which is the instrument I trust more. I made 17 small adjustments to the membrane tension over the course of the afternoon. By the time the Velreth light shifted, and the workshop went to its secondary evening tone, I had a membrane that produced a chord I was satisfied with. I closed the figure, applied the tension fit locks, and set it in the center of the counter. I blew across the intake aperture at the figure's chest. The chord came out clean, 3 notes in ripple, the middle one a fraction forward of the other 2, which is the Velkasari convention, and it carried across the workshop with a clarity that made me pause. There was something in that sound that I could not name, a quality that was not just correct, but proper, as though the sound was exactly what it was supposed to be, and anything less than exact would have been a falsification of something real. I put the figure in the safe compartment under the counter. I cleaned my tools. I went home. The child came back the next morning as I was opening the workshop. She appeared at the end of the annex corridor, while I was still unfastening the security seal on the door, just standing there, waiting, not impatiently, but with a stillness that I had started to associate with her, like she had been there for a while and was content to wait however long more was required. I let her in. I retrieved the figure from the safe compartment and set it on the counter. I did not hand it to her immediately. I said, "Before I return this, I want to show you something." She came to the counter. I held the figure up and blew across the intake aperture. The 3-note chord filled the workshop. She went very still in a different way from her usual stillness, not waiting but arrested, as though the sound had hit something physical in her and she had not been prepared for it. Her amber honey eyes did not change expression exactly, but the quality of light behind them shifted, the way a room shifts when a window opens. Then she exhaled, one slow breath, and she put out both hands. I placed the Vothanar in them. She held it the same way she had brought it in, pressed to her sternum. Both hands careful, but the tension was different now. Not the tension of carrying something broken, the tension of carrying something whole. She stood at the counter for a moment without moving. I waited. I am accustomed to waiting. Most of my work involves waiting for a fault to manifest, waiting for a reading to stabilize, waiting for the instrument to show you what it is doing rather than what you expect it to be doing. I know how to be still while something else resolves. The child lifted the Vothanar slightly away from her sternum and blew across the intake aperture herself. Softly, a controlled breath, the way someone blows who has done it before and knows how much air is needed. The chord came out. 3 notes in ripple, the middle one forward. It filled the workshop the same way it had filled it last evening. Cleanly, properly, with that quality I could not name precisely, but which I had decided was the quality of something being exactly what it was supposed to be. She lowered the figure and stood with it held in both hands, and her eyes slightly closed. Not dramatically, just enough. The way you close your eyes when you are not composing yourself but confirming something. Then she opened them. "The pitch," she said, not a question. Class 7 Federation Acoustic Composite. It will hold indefinitely under normal handling conditions. If it fractures again, the same repair applies. Any precision instrument workshop with mineral composite stock can do it, but you tuned it. Yes. She looked at the figure for a moment, then she looked at me. "You tuned it by ear," she said, "not just the calibration tool." I said nothing for a moment. I was not accustomed to being seen that precisely by anyone, let alone a child I had spoken fewer than 50 words to. In 31 years of workshop practice, I had not once had a client comment on the distinction between the calibration tool and the ear. Most clients did not know there was a distinction. The ones who did know it, in theory, did not generally apply the knowledge to what I had just done for them. They were thinking about their instrument, not about my method. This child had been thinking about both. "The tool gives you the note," I said finally. "The ear gives you the chord." She considered this with the same quiet attention she had given to the chord itself. "The note is correct and the chord is right," she said. "They're not the same standard." "No," I said, "they're not." She reached into the fold of her garment and produced a second stone. This one a flat piece of pale gold mineral, the warm amber to gold shading of Vel-Ka-Sa-Ri geological formations. She set it on the counter beside the gray stone she had left yesterday. "For the tuning," she said. I looked at the 2 stones, a gray Velas gift stone and a pale gold Velka's formation stone. 2 stones from 2 different traditions, 2 different systems of meaning, both placed on the same counter. I had worked at this station for 31 years and I had never had a customer leave 2 gift stones. "You don't owe me for the tuning," I said. "Tuning is part of the work." "I know," she said. "The stones aren't payment." She left again. I stood at the counter with the 2 stones and the memory of the chord, and I thought about what she had said. The note is correct, and the chord is right. They're not the same standard. A child traveling alone on a deep transit way station with a name day toy that had to be exactly right, who knew the difference between correct and right, and who used 2 different stone-giving traditions to say 2 different things she wanted on record. I put the stones in my breast pocket, which is where I put small things that I intend to think about. I kept my hand over the pocket for a moment, before going back to work. Something about the weight of the 2 stones together was specific and grounding in a way I did not immediately have words for. She came back a 3rd time, 4 days later, without the Vath Anor. I was in the middle of a commission, a Velthar navigational array, 3 components, all requiring recalibration after a transit mishap, and I was at the point in the work where interruption is expensive. I looked up from the array and said, "I'm in the middle of something." She said, "I know, I can wait." She went to the low workbench along the south wall of the workshop, which holds my incoming work queue, and she sat on the stool beside it. She sat very straight, hands folded in her lap, watching me work. Not fidgeting, not talking, not doing any of the things that make a waiting presence disruptive. She simply sat and watched with the focused attention of someone who is actually interested in what she is seeing. I worked for another hour and a half before I finished the component I was in the middle of. During that hour and a half, the child sat on the stool and watched. Once, when I was setting a fine gauge probe tool down between components and my hand was occupied, she reached across and moved the probe to the tool rail without being asked, which is where I would have put it if my hand had been free. She had been watching long enough to know where the tool went. I finished the component, set it in the calibration stand, and turned to face her. "What do you need?" "Nothing today," she said. "I came because I wanted to watch." I looked at her for a moment. "Why?" "Because you work the way my mother works," she said. "Like the thing you're doing is the only thing in the room." I had no answer for that. I said, "All right." I turned back to the calibration stand. She sat there for another 2 hours. When she left, she did not say goodbye. She simply stood up, nodded once and walked out. I watched her go and thought that I had spent 31 years at this station, and had never had an apprentice, had never wanted one, had never understood the appeal of teaching a trade to someone else, when the work itself was what mattered. And yet, I had just spent 2 hours working in comfortable silence with a child I had spoken fewer than 100 words to, and the silence had been exactly the right kind. I took the 2 stones out of my breast pocket that evening and set them on the shelf above my work counter. I kept them there. The syndicate agents came to the station 6 days after the child's 3rd visit. There were 3 of them. I did not know they were syndicate at first. They presented as transit passengers, which is the common cover, and Cathasaran sees enough through traffic that 3 new faces in the concourse were not unusual. I noticed them because one of them came to the workshop the morning of their first day. He was a male, mid-height, Vel-Kasari coloring, the same warm gold skin tones as the child, though darker, and with the marked musculature of someone who has done outdoor work for a long time. He wore a dark transit jacket with no markings. He looked at the workshop sign, came in, and set a small device on the counter. It was a Vel-Kasari resonance scanner, the kind used for property identification, which in the Vel-Kasari tradition works by detecting specific frequency signatures from named resonance objects. Each Vathaner, properly tuned to its owner, broadcasts a distinctive signature. The scanner reads that signature and matches it to a registered name. "Needs calibration," he said. "It's reading a half-step flat." I picked it up. It was not reading flat. The calibration was fine. The instrument was working exactly as it was designed to work. I turned it over in my hands and noted the house crest embossed on the back panel, a Vel-Kasari acquisition house marking, the kind used by private recovery operations. Not government, not compact enforcement, private. I said, "What were you trying to read when you thought it was flat?" He looked at me. "Cargo inventory check." I set the scanner down on the counter and looked at it for a long moment. A Vel-Kasari resonance scanner set to property identification mode will read any resonant object within approximately 60 meters that has a registered frequency signature. A Vathaner, properly tuned, has a registered signature. A child carrying a properly tuned Vathaner is, by Vel-Kasari property law, a locatable object if the Vathaner is registered to a house and the warrant names the frequency. I thought about the 3-note chord. I thought about the 17 adjustments I had made to the membrane tension. I thought about the Class 7 Federation acoustic composite, which has a slightly different density profile from natural Vel-cast crystal, close enough to produce the right sound, but not identical in its frequency output. I was still for a moment. Then I picked up the scanner and ran a standard calibration check on it. It took about 3 minutes. I set it back on the counter. "It was reading flat," I said. "I've corrected it. The half-step deviation was in the tertiary reference oscillator. It should read accurately now." I named a low service fee. He paid it without comment and left. I turned to my workbench and sat down, and was still for perhaps 5 minutes. The scanner had not been reading flat. It had been reading exactly right. But it had come to me with a problem, a real problem from the user's perspective. And the problem was that it was not finding the frequency it was looking for on the station. A Vathaner tuned to the precise Vel-cast crystal frequency would broadcast at 847.3 Hz in the primary note of the 3-note chord. The syndicate's warrant, I was quite certain, named that frequency, or one very close to it. The Voth tenor in the child's hands currently broadcast at 847.9 Hz. I had adjusted the membrane tension 17 times. I had tuned by ear, not just by the calibration tool. The calibration tool had told me I was within 2% of the nominal frequency. It had not told me I was at 847.3. It had not been designed to tell me that, because I had not asked it to tell me that, because when I made the repair, I had not known there was a warrant. I had not moved the frequency on purpose. I had moved it because the chord told me to. Because at 847.9, the decay balance across all 3 notes was better than it was at 847.3, and the better balance was the right sound, and the right sound was what the child had asked for. I sat at my workbench and thought about this for 5 minutes. Then I got up and went to the calibration station on the south wall of the workshop, where I keep a high-precision frequency analyzer, a Federation scientific-grade instrument, not a trade tool, accurate to 0.01 Hz. I had bought it 20 years ago for a single commission involving navigational beacon calibration, and had found it useful enough to keep. I pulled out the workshop log for the Voth tenor repair. I had recorded the final membrane tension settings as I record all final settings on every precision job I do. I looked at the tension values and ran a theoretical frequency calculation against them using the composite's known density profile. 847.9 Hz, primary note of the 3-note chord. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I went to the filing cabinet against the north wall of the workshop, where I keep a copy of the Vel-Kasari House Property Code, the complete text, purchased 12 years ago from a legal archive vendor, for reasons I no longer remembered clearly. I pulled it out, found the section on Resonance Object Recovery Warrants. A Resonance Object Recovery Warrant under the Vel-Kasari House Property Code, Section 14, Article 3, must name the specific frequency signature of the object being recovered. The frequency must be stated in hertz to 2 decimal places, and must be within 0.1 hertz of the object's actual broadcast frequency, for the warrant to be executable. 847.3 hertz and 847.9 hertz were 0.6 hertz apart. I sat at my workbench and read that provision 3 times. Then I closed the codebook and set it carefully on the counter. What I had done was repair a broken toy. What I had done was tune a resonance membrane by ear, because the ear gives you the chord. What I had resulted in, not by design, not by calculation, by craft, was a Vathane, whose broadcast frequency was now 0.6 hertz outside the warrant's executable range. I did not know at that moment who the child was. I did not know who her mother was. I knew she was Vel-Kasari, that she had left somewhere, that she carried a name day toy that needed to be exactly right, and that she had recognized careful work when she saw it, and had come back 3 times to sit in my workshop and watch. That was all I knew. That was enough. I found the child that afternoon. She was in the station's secondary commons area, a low-traffic corridor near the annex junction where the concourse lighting is diffuse, and there are no vendor posts, the kind of place that people use when they want to sit somewhere without being particularly visible. She had her back against the wall and the Vathaner in her lap. I sat down across from her. I said, 3 agents arrived yesterday. I believe they are looking for you. I believe they are tracking you by the toy's resonance frequency. She looked at me with her amber honey eyes. She did not look frightened. She looked like someone who has been aware of something for a long time, and has just been told that another person is also now aware of it. I know, she said. The Vathaner. I repaired broadcasts at 847.9 hertz. The warrant they are carrying, I believe, names 847.3 hertz. Those are not the same frequency. She was quiet for a moment. You changed it. I tuned it. The 847.9 is the correct pitch for the instrument. The 847.3 is what the original Velcast crystal produced, but the original crystal was cracked. A cracked membrane doesn't produce correct pitch. I paused. The warrant names the incorrect pitch. I watched the child think about this. She was processing something quickly and carefully, the way I had seen her watch me work, not performing calculation but doing it, interior and silent. So the warrant can't attach, she said. Not to a frequency it doesn't name, not under Section 14, Article 3. I paused again. I looked it up. She looked at me for a long moment. Why? It was a real question. She meant, why did you look it up? Why did you go to that trouble? Why does a Federation repair workshop operator in a deep transit way station care about the property code of a house she has never heard of? I thought about what to say. I thought about the 2 stones on the shelf above my counter, and about the hour and a half in which she had sat straight-backed on the workshop stool and watched me work without making a sound, and about the probe tool moved to the tool rail at the right moment. I thought about what she had said, you work like the thing you're doing is the only thing in the room, and about what that had meant coming from a child who said very little and chose everything she said precisely. Because you asked for the exact sound, I said, and I gave you the exact sound, and no one should be found by something I fixed. She held the Vathanor a little more closely, and for just a moment, something shifted in her face. Not emotion exactly, not the way a child's face shifts when it breaks open toward tears or joy, but a small, precise alteration, a single degree of change, the way the light in a room shifts when a window opens by a crack. Then it was gone, and she was still again. I need to tell you something, she said. I waited. My mother is the Vel-Kasari Navigator Sovereign. She said it the same way she said everything, evenly, without inflection. As a fact, that is what it is. She is called the Silent Shore. She has held the Vel-Kasari primary passage lanes for 19 years, without yielding a single transit dispute. She has ended 2 house wars by sitting down at a table and saying nothing until the other side understood that she would still be sitting there in 100 years, and they would not. She looked at me steadily. She is the person those agents answer to, or used to answer to. There is a succession dispute. I said nothing for a moment. I thought about the garment. The fine cream fabric with copper thread trim, travel-worn, too long for her. I thought about the carving on the spine of the Vathanor, the incised naming marks I had not been able to read. Primary house naming marks I now understood. Then you need the station's duty officer, I said. Not me. I need both, she said. The duty officer needs someone who can testify to the frequency discrepancy. I looked at her. You knew the frequency law before you came to me. She met my eyes. I knew a precision restorer who tuned by ear would change the frequency. I knew that if the frequency changed by more than 0.1 Hz, the warrant would not be executable. I knew that the workshop in Concourse Annex 7 had a Federation scientific-grade frequency analyzer on the south wall. She paused. I came to the station on a transit vessel 3 months ago. I have been here for 3 months. I have read the compact code and the Vel Kasari property code, and every publicly accessible workshop registration document on the station. I have been waiting for someone I could trust to come to. Another pause, shorter. The sound it made when you gave it back told me you were that person. I was quiet for a moment. 31 years at a waystation workshop in a corridor system at the outer edge of the Keth Aza run, and I had never been anyone's endpoint. I had been a tool, a good tool, a precise one, the last tool before the problem became unsolvable. That had always been sufficient, I said. All right, then we go to the duty officer. Sath, the customs officer, had worked Gate 14 of Keth SMRN for 22 years. He was 61 years old, and he was the most unimpressible person I had ever known, which is why I had respected him for 30 years without ever being particularly friendly with him. He looked at the child, looked at me, looked at the Vel Kasari property code I had brought, looked at the workshop log showing the tension settings and the frequency calculation I had run that afternoon, and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "You're saying the warrant can't run because the frequency is wrong. The warrant names 847.3 Hz. The object broadcasts at 847.9 Hz. Section 14, Article 3, requires the warrant to be within 0.1 Hz. It is 0.6 Hz outside that tolerance. And you've got the instrument log. I've got the Federation scientific-grade frequency analyzer reading from this afternoon, the workshop log with the tension settings from the day I made the repair, and the calculation showing the expected frequency from those settings against the composite material's known density profile." Sath looked at the child. "And you're the Navigator Sovereign's daughter?" "Yes." "Right." He reached under his desk and produced the station's official record tablet, the one with the compact stamp and the counter-signature authority. He opened it. He turned to me. "You understand that if I log this, it becomes a compact matter, and the agents will be notified, and there will be a legal proceeding, and you will have to appear at it. I understand that, and you're willing to do that. I repaired the instrument. My log says so. My workshop says so. The instrument says so. That is simply the record." I paused. "I'll appear at as many proceedings as there are." He looked at me for a moment with an expression I had not seen from him before. Not exactly surprised, because Seth was not a man who was easily surprised, but acknowledging. The way a man acknowledges something he had not calculated into his estimate of a situation. Then he turned back to the tablet and began writing. It took 3 days for the compact duty notification to process, and the syndicate agents to be formally informed. On the second day of those 3, the lead agent came back to the workshop, not with the scanner this time, with the warrant. He set it on the counter. It was a laminated document, standard Vel Kasari house deer forfeiture format, with the house crest embossed in the upper right corner, and the frequency clause clearly printed in Section 2, Paragraph 4, primary resonance signature, 847.3 Hz, plus or minus 0.1 Hz. He said, "You filed a frequency dispute." "I filed a compact record notification," I said. "The frequency dispute is in the record. The frequency is within normal variance for Velkay's crystal. The object is not Velkay's crystal. It is Federation Class 7 acoustic composite. I documented the material in the repair log. The composite has a different density profile and produces a higher fundamental than natural crystal at equivalent membrane tension." I paused. The warrant was written for a Vel-cast crystal membrane. The object being sought has a Federation composite membrane. Different material, different frequency. He looked at me for a long time. He was trying to calculate something. I could see the calculation running. Whether the frequency discrepancy was real or manufactured, whether it would hold at a compact proceeding, whether the cost of pursuing the warrant against the probability of losing it was worth the house's resources. I looked back at him. I'm not a person who is easily looked through. I have spent 31 years in a small workshop doing work that requires complete attention, and one of the things that work gives you is the ability to hold a gaze while your mind is somewhere else entirely, assessing tolerances. After a moment, he picked up the warrant and left. The compact proceeding happened at a regional adjudication node 14 months later. I took the workshop log, the frequency analyzer reading, the material documentation, and the Vel-Kasari property code marked at Section 14, Article 3. I testified for 11 minutes. The regional adjudicator asked 4 questions. The syndicate's advocate asked 2. Then the adjudicator ruled that the warrant could not be executed against an object broadcasting at a frequency more than 0.1 Hz from the stated frequency, and that the substitution of Federation composite for natural Vel-cast crystal constituted a material change documented prior to the warrant's application, and that the warranty was therefore void on its face. I flew home the same day. The flight took 6 hours. I ate a meal in the transit lounge. I read a technical journal about composite membrane fabrication that I had been meaning to read for 3 months. When I arrived back at Kethos Amaran, the chalk-yellow Vel-Reth light was coming through the skylight at a low angle, and I sat at my workbench and picked up the next commission in the queue. A Velthar beacon housing that needed its tertiary oscillator replaced, and went to work. During those 3 days, the child stayed in the workshop. I did not invite her. She simply appeared at the door each morning at 5th hour, sat on the stool at the south workbench, and watched me work. I did not tell her to leave. I gave her small tasks, holding a component while I calibrated an adjacent one, reading off measurements from the analyzer display, moving tools to the rail when my hands were occupied. She did these things without being told twice. On the second evening, she said, "What will you do when this is over?" "Work," I said. "The same work?" "The same work." She considered this. "Don't you want more than this?" I set down the component I was holding and thought about the question for a moment. It was a real question, asked in the same way she asked everything, directly, without decoration, because she wanted to know. "This is a workshop in a corridor," I said. "Things come through here broken and go out fixed. That is a specific function. If I do it well for long enough, then some percentage of the things moving through the corridor work better than they would have if the corridor didn't have this workshop in it. That is not nothing." She looked at me for a moment. "My mother says that about passage lanes. They are corridors. If you hold them open and keep them clear, then some percentage of the things moving through them arrive." She paused. She didn't used to say it out loud. She just did it. I thought about that. "The Vathaner," I said. "The sound it makes when it's working right. Is it really the exact sound, the original one?" "I don't know," she said. "I was given it before I could remember, but it feels right." I nodded. That was the answer I had expected. The Navigator Sovereign arrived on the 5th day after we went to Sath. I was in the workshop mid-morning when the concourse went quiet in a particular way. Not the silence of low traffic, which is a natural quiet, but the silence of attention, the kind that happens when a space that is accustomed to ordinary movement receives something that is not ordinary. I looked up from my workbench. Through the workshop's open door, I could see the far end of the concourse annex, and at the far end of the concourse annex were 3 figures. 2 of them, the compact escort officers who had been stationed at the gate since Sath filed his record, and one of them, someone else entirely. She was tall. That was the first thing. Tall even by Vel-Cesari standards, which is taller than most. She had the same pale sandy gold skin as the child, but in the way that a mountain has the same geological composition as the chalk it sits on. The scale was different. The weight was different. Everything the material expressed was different. Her hair was silver, worn pulled back, and her eyes were the same amber honey that the child had, but in her face they were not warm. They were still, the stillness of deep water, not frozen, not cold, but too deep for surface movement to reach. She wore a Vel-Cesari formal transit mantle, dark copper and cream, and she walked with the particular unhurried precision of someone who has never in her life needed to indicate urgency, to communicate priority. The child came out of the workshop. She had heard the concourse go quiet and she had looked. And now she walked across the annex floor at the same unhurried pace she always walked at. They stopped 3 meters apart. The navigator sovereign looked at her daughter for a long moment. Her face held the stillness of deep water. Then she said in a voice that was quiet and carried without effort, "You are well." "Yes," the child said. "You found somewhere safe." "Yes." The navigator sovereign's amber honey eyes moved then, a deliberate measured shift to the doorway of the workshop where I was standing. She looked at me for a moment, with the particular quality of attention that I had come to recognize in the child. Precise, taking everything in, deciding. "The repair workshop," she said. "Yes. My daughter tells me you tuned it by ear. The calibration tool gives you the note," I said. "The ear gives you the chord." The navigator sovereign was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I have been called the Silent Shore for 19 years, because I have held passage lanes by sitting still and waiting until the correct moment. My daughter has told me that you worked in a similar way." She paused. She rarely says that of anyone. I had nothing to say to that. I was aware that I was standing in the doorway of a 40-square-meter repair workshop in a corridor system at the outer edge of a transit way station, talking to the woman who held the Vel-Kasari primary passage lanes, and that the correct thing to do was say nothing and let the moment be what it was. The navigator sovereign reached into the fold of her mantle and produced a small flat stone. It was the pale gold Vel-Kasari formation stone, the same type as the one the child had left on my counter, but larger, and on its flat underside, pressed into the mineral, was a single incised line, the navigator sovereign's housemark. She held it out toward me. "For the work you did," she said, "and for the work you will continue to do. Kethos Amaran is a corridor that is now registered under Vel-Kasari primary passage lane protection. You will have no difficulty with acquisition warrants in this station again." I took the stone. It was smooth and warm and heavier than it looked. The navigator sovereign looked at me for another moment, the way the child looked, as though all of you was visible and was being accurately recorded. Then she inclined her head once, a small and entirely dignified gesture. She took her daughter's hand. They walked toward the gate. At the junction between the annex corridor and the main concourse, the child looked back. She did not wave. She held the Vathanar up slightly in both hands pressed against her sternum, and for a half-second I could hear, or I thought I could hear, across 40 meters of station corridor with all the ambient noise of a working way station around us, the 3-note chord, rippling slightly, the middle note forward of the other two. 847.9 hertz, the exact sound. Then they were gone. I went back into the workshop. I set the navigator sovereign stone on the shelf above the counter, beside the 2 smaller stones. I looked at the 3 stones for a moment, 3 gift stones from 2 people telling 3 different true things. The gray Vela stone that said I will come back, the pale gold stone that said for the tuning, and this one that said for the work you will continue to do. I picked up the calibration tool I had been using before the concourse went quiet. I looked at the component in the stand. I set the tool down again. I stood at the counter for a moment in the chalk yellow Velrath light, which at that hour comes through the skylight at a low angle and turns everything the color of old bone, and I thought about the difference between the note and the chord, about how a cracked membrane doesn't produce correct pitch, and about how that is true of instruments and not untrue of everything else, about how 31 years in a corridor is not, in fact, nothing. Then I picked up the tool again and went back to work.